Here we go. Stream. Okay, I'm waiting to get live. Here we go.
Awesome.
Whew. Alrighty, good afternoon, folks. It is a bloody warm, humid day here in the Eastern Seaboard, at least in Toronto. And wow, it's hard to get stuff done. I was just talking to my friend here, LiteratureDevil, about just getting work done, and I just uploaded a video, and I just had to get it out of my system. It was so cringy. And now we're talking about something less so much more. I mean, just to know that Michael Pondsmith is doing interviews and still working, and just, like when I watched that video and I was like, I gotta get someone online who appreciates this guy. And anyone who's been reading or paying attention to Cyberpunk or just reading any kind of science fiction will appreciate what Michael Pondsmith, because when you hear him talk and you see what he's talking about, it's like, yes, this is a writer who's passionate, has been doing this for 20 years, and you just see how he could be like 90 years old, he could be 7 years old. He's so enthusiastic.
Yeah, that's what I got from. I watched the video a little bit, and that's what I got from. He doesn't seem like this corporate guy, or someone trying to push an idea or an agenda or whatever. He seems like a guy who wrote something and is very happy, very excited to put it out in front of you and have the world experience the same happiness and passion he has. That's what it seems like to me.
I know, because it's hard to get that from really good writers. Like you say, like a Neil Gaiman, like he's pretty reserved and he writes so much. Yeah. So if he were to promote something, he'd be very like relaxed and British and friendly. Michael's like, wow, this is like, I've been doing this for like 22 years.
He's animated. He has his hands flying everywhere. I mean, he's just really excited. Lots of high energy, wild-eyed. He's just full of passion.
Yeah, and the thing is, he's a writer that comes from the gaming side of creativity, as you say, the D&D or the pen and paper style gameplay, where it's like it's all in his head, because dungeon masters have to have their entire campaign figured out before they start playing, and it's all this mental exercise. So if you've been doing that for so long, and then you start writing, and then you start writing books, and you make books for those campaigns, and then you see this $1 million company come by and say, hey, we want to make a video game off that. Obviously, that would drive him up the wall. He'd be like, oh my God, this is going to be so cool. And then that's what he's been doing for the past at least 4 or 5 years.
And that seems to be a trend with these guys who come from the old school, like the old guard, people who grew up playing Gygax's D&D and everything.
Yeah.
Like, you have Caesar Romero, what's his name? The Baldur's, was that the Baldur's Gate guy?
Oh, I don't know. I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, he was inspired by D&D, and so he basically just took the rules of D&D and put his own video game. And if you hear these people talk, you hear the interviews and how they refer to the game. These people are highly passionate, and maybe to their own detriment sometimes. Maybe they're a little too. They might seem on the crazy side a little bit, but the one thing they all have in common is they're highly motivated, highly passionate.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because it's not like they're all like super original ideas. They take the rule set and they make their own thing. And that's where you got the Planescapes. That's where you get all the crazy alpha protocols and all the other versions of the real-time with pause strategy games. It's just taking something which they've seen, been so inspired and so enthusiastic, and said, hey, you know what? I want to dedicate my life, at least for the next few years, to making something original and new. And you're like, oh, I've never heard of this campaign from D&D before. I've never heard of White Wolf Publishing. I've never heard of Cyberpunk Red, and that's what we're going to look at today. And what Cyberpunk Red is essentially the second book in the I guess you can call it a trilogy, from Cyberpunk 2020 to Cyberpunk 2077. And it's like the Empire Strikes Back, and the way he describes it is very interesting. I won't spoil that. You can watch it with us, but it's just that idea that there's this whole reason, this whole other story, this whole other world behind the setup of the game. And we're getting that, which I really, really love, because there's not just, hey, we're going to make a really popular game that has guns and is in the future. It's like, no, we're basing it off this entire universe that's come before us, and we're giving you the kind of like the episode 4 version of that, but for gaming. I really like that idea.
And as we'll see, I mean, the environment they build, it's filled with life. It feels like a real living, breathing environment.
Okay, we can keep talking about Cyberpunk, but we're going to go watch the video because we're going to be here forever.
These are our enemies. Look what the corporations are doing, and I'm going to try and shoot them. Cyberpunk Red is the next chapter, let's call it the next arc in the Cyberpunk storyline, okay? And it is basically about a period after the Fourth Corporate War and how basically everything gets rebuilt in that period to eventually end up in the world you'll see in 2077.
And I just want to make a comment because a lot of games that I've played that they try to make a bridging gap or DLC or supplementary books. That's cool. I mean, I'm all for writers doing things outside of the games and say, okay, when Mass Effect 1 came out, they wanted to make Mass Effect 2 and they want to make Mass Effect 3. They had all this supplementary material, all this DLC, and that's great. I mean, I'm all for that. But you shouldn't need supplementary material to bridge a gap. The game or the media itself, if it's a sequel, should speak for itself and should connect to the next chapter or the next book by itself. So this is kind of like it's like reading the rest of Tolkien's works, all the stuff, all the poetry, all the Silmarillion, all the other books that sort of build up to Lord of the Rings. And that's what Cyberpunk Red is kind of like. It's kind of like the build up to that. That's why I really like this idea. So who knows? Maybe the game will be so popular that 2077 will have a sequel, but it's not going to be handled in this sort of lackadaisy sort of way where they'll say, hey, Mike, can you write another book for us? He'll be like, well, not only will I write another book, I'll make it connect to what we're doing next. Like he's going to really allow the reader or the audience to have more material. So if you're really a big fan of the series, I think everyone's going to go nuts next year when this game releases in April. I think it's really going to be a hit. And they're going to be like, I want like the poster, I want the shoes, I want the underwear, I want to sleep with this stuff. You know, when you were a kid in the 80s and you were watching Star Wars, you bought all the bedspreads. You know, that sort of feeling I think we're going to get from Cyberpunk here.
If 2020 were Star Wars, then Cyberpunk Red is basically Empire Strikes Back, and then 77 is Return of the Jedi. We've always tended at Talsorian to look at the Cyberpunk series as though it's a comic book. And you know, comic books reset, have arcs, have changes and so forth like that. We've always seen it that way from the beginning. Even before I met the people over at CDPR, that was basically a tenet.
Now, I'm kind of curious what kind of comic book he's referring to, because when you talk about comic books resetting or rebooting, you tend to think of the big two, like Marvel and DC. It's like, okay, how can we make something fresh and new while keeping continuity? And the general rule that I've seen is that they just put it into another universe. They put it into another time stream or some other alternate reality. And
those what if stories, like I know the DC had one where Joker was a pirate, and Batman was a pirate hunter or something like that. So.
Yeah, the Elseworlds and the what ifs I always thought were the best part of Marvel and DC, because the other mainstream titles can keep writing, but you'll have like a random author like, you know what if Thor was, or what if the hammer of Thor was picked up by someone else? What if one of Jean Grey married someone else or whatever? Like all these what ifs with time travel and what have you. That's where you get the real creativity, and that's where you're allowed to express yourself when your producer would be like, no, we can't kill off Logan, or you know, we can't do this or that. So rebooting in a comic book is very different than rebooting in, let's say, movies, because no one really dies in comics. So
yeah, not since Superman came back from the dead. That was the big one, I think.
That was the most popularized, because we do know that Superman died previously in the past at least 4 or 5 times before in the 60s and 70s. But that was the most like, all right, we're going to do something new. But they went too far, I think. After the death of Superman, they went with Superman Red and Blue, which was... if no one remembers Superman Red or Blue, you're very lucky. Because it was the strangest, like, why, who, where. Yeah. So...
Yeah, this Superman was the big one. I mean, it wasn't the first, obviously, of course, but it was the huge one. It was they had like the funeral for him. They had the pin-up poster. Everyone was, taking him to the funeral, and they had like the big memorials. It was like he was actually dead because he was supposed to be, and then they brought him back, and that's what I think would kill that whole sense of mortality in comics. Like anyone can just come back at any time. It doesn't matter how big their death was or how definitive their death was. They can always come back. and kind of killed that sense of mortality.
Well, they're never going to let go of the big three in DC. They're never going to let go of the X-Men franchise, or especially Spider-Man. And I think the most popular comic these days for Marvel is the big kahuna on the sales charts the past few years, of course, because of the MCU. And the most popular comic, believe it or not, is Black Cat, which no one has really seen on the big screen. And it's kind of curious. I'm kind of curious myself because I haven't read it lately. But comic books are going through a transition phase, as they usually are. But nowadays they're dying out, and we have to figure out what's making them tick, aside from movies. And to think of a video game as a series of comic books is a very interesting way to present yourself to a video game developer, because it's kind of like the natural progression when I think of Japanese manga or Japanese cartoons. It starts from a bunch of sketches, and then it goes into manga. And then if it's really popular, it goes into anime or an OVA, which is...
It is that natural evolution of what seems to happen with manga.
But we don't get that in the Western world. We just get video games, and sometimes people might be inspired by a cartoon, or like was it Joe Madrea? He finally made War Chasers into a video game a few years ago, after like 2 decades or a decade and a half of waiting for him to do a sequel to his War Chasers cartoon or comic. And he wanted to study video game development in the early 2000s. That's why he quit doing it. And it's such a weird transition. Why not just start from stories, then comics, then if someone picks up your title, go into animation?
It seems like we have such a huge disconnect between these different industries, because, I mean, it's very difficult to see something start off in one medium and then transition to another in the West. I mean, I think we have such a bad trajectory. I mean, such a bad track record with transitioning video games to movies or something. I think we have like a maybe 90%, maybe even 100% failure rate when it comes from adapting video games into movies. I mean, sometimes they hit cult classic status because they're so terrible that people dislike them. But there's never a moment where the adaptation is really good. Like, I can't think of a single really good movie adaptation of a video game that really, hits home and keeps the heart and soul of what made the video game great into what that transitioned over with the movie. But with video games and then transitioning to maybe, I don't know, a television show, you kind of get the same problem there. But when you have something like a manga, they transition usually pretty good. It seems to fit. I mean, the anime seems to be like a moving manga, and that's probably because they have like very similar styles, and they'll have like the very similar structures when they're putting stories together. So it seems to be more connected over there whereas Eastern is going, or at least Japan is concerned. It seems very well connected.
It's a safer bet too when you see something in print and it goes through about not even 20 episodes or 20 comics. Like I was reading, this was probably maybe 50 episodes or comics called Arifureta, which is another isekai anime where, or an isekai style anime where the weakest guy ends up becoming the strongest guy, and it just was released 3 weeks ago. And there's nothing inherently special because once you read one isekai, it's almost all the same. And I think they must have summarized the first 8 comics in the first episode, where they skip all the time where he was on Earth or going through training or getting lost and then getting separated from the group. He just becomes a badass when the first episode you're like, whoa, what happened to so all the build up. But when you think about it, the anime is visual. It's very quick. It's faster than comic. So you have to show things quicker. The problem is you lose a lot of the build-up. So it's like, oh, it's a visual spectacle. And then you have to bring back the drama. You have to slow it down. So once you crank up the action, you got to slow it down. Wait, why am I watching this guy blow away people? Why do I care? Oh, right, okay, he has a desire for vengeance, or he has a desire to survive, or man versus nature, whatever. So you have to realize the medium. But if you have comic book artists, they know the medium, and animating that is just the extra step, the extra effort to get animators on your side. And you are essentially the guy who created it, the keyframer, and the animators do fill in the blanks for you. So hire some talent, hire some voice actors, hire a producer, get some musicians, get some sound effect guys. Boom, animation.
Yeah, and on that front too, I mean, have you? I mean, I think every time I've seen like one of those short anime series where you have like it's like maybe 13 episodes long. You get to maybe the eighth episode, and you say, "Whoa, it's." I mean, what episode is this? It seems like very definitive. It seems like episode maybe 20 or something like that. It's only episode 8. They pack a lot of drama and action and character development in very small packages, kind of like the Chinese pack their food. You fit a lot of stuff into a small amount of time. It's very interesting.
It's always been a debate between the fans of manga and the fans of anime, where you have the one guy who says, nope, just like with books and movies in the West, nope, just read the book, don't play the game, don't watch the movie. And then there's the guys like, well, I'd rather just watch half an hour, 22 minutes of the anime or the show as opposed to reading the manga or reading the comic. And then you have both fans like me, or who just absorb everything. And you just sort of criticize, well, Game of Thrones did skip out all the part of the Blackfish and all these other great characters. And that's, I think, where we're having the disconnect, where they lose the spirit of what these things are in the West. Whereas in the manga, they seem to get it. They seem to understand, because there's so much manga. There's manga for all ages of every genre out there. So for them to pick a winner, they really have to be picky. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And I'm still waiting for the next Fate Stay Night movie adaptation of their third route, which is Heaven's Feel. It's on the second movie. It's going on to the third, and it takes like 8 months to make these things, if not more. So it's a lot of effort to get these anime produced movies, and we just got to get the West to figure out this progression instead of always going to Kickstarter with independent firms or independent companies, saying, "Oh, I can't pitch my idea to a publisher. I got to do my own thing." And we got to help these people out. I don't think Kickstarter is the only answer out there. It's got to be better.
There's been a lot of gatekeeping, at least in the West, at least in separate industries. There's a lot of gatekeeping. It's not really about talent. And I mean, in Japan, it seems like they're very like, I guess, colder or more clinical. I mean, they're just into it. They're just in it to, all right, you're the best. And it's very deep in their culture, right? You are the best, therefore I'm taking you first. And they seem to be like that when they're selecting something to adapt. It's like, okay, this looks good. This meets our standards. You're good to go for progression. In the West, it's more like, who do you know? Do I know you? And I said, okay, so your stuff can go in. And I interviewed this author, Matthew Kaddish, and he said, and he's been to Hollywood and everything, and he told me about all the interest, these small details and the hidden details of Hollywood. And it seems to be how it works. It's not how good your stuff is. It's not how good your writing is or how skilled you are. It's about who you know and what your politics are and that sort of thing. And so, according to him, that seems to be the case. And from what I've seen, that seems to be the case also. And I even mentioned Ryan Johnson to him, and he said, we agreed, Ryan Johnson is a hack writer. He's not very good at anything, but he has the right politics. He knows the right people, so he was put on the biggest projects. And it doesn't seem to work that way, at least not in Japan, where they go off merit, maybe to an absurd, because that's how Japan is. They have to be the best at everything. And the cultural norm in Japan is that your average work production should be your best. There's no going over the top in Japan. You are always supposed to mandatorily do your best. It's the least you can do. So I think that might be one problem we have here in the West, is that why there's so much gatekeeping. It's because it's not good skill and good ideas won't really get you through the door. It's more about who you know and what you know.
And the progression from media, or starting off with an idea, being passionate, making all this content, whether you're an artist for art or rather comics, and trying to sell that online, trying to sell that in print, and making the progression to animation or video game or web comic or whatever. It's always a struggle. And I always thought that the person with the most passion and the best idea that expresses it well gets noticed. And you saw that with hits like One Punch Man, where he's still doing his webcomic. He's still doing that. You know, it looks as if you just gave him a marker in the first draft. He just started drawing these sketchy looking characters, and you're like, wow, that's really, really amateurish. But
yeah, I mean, I saw. I mean, it looks like something I could do.
Yeah, no, that's how basic it is. But because the idea is sound, and because he kept doing it, someone said, "Hey, we'll make a better one," and they produced a better manga. And finally, they actually made an anime. It's one of the best animes we have of the decade, almost. So, yeah, we can talk about art and the progression of art for another hour, but let's keep going with Mr. Pondsmith here.
Part of it is that in a role-playing game, at some point, characters and situations become static. RSI becomes too powerful to stop. Players become too powerful to stop. So you have to reset, but you have to find a smart way to do it.
That's such an important thing, because when you get a game and you want to progress the story of a game, you don't just say, oh, you lost all your ammo, you lost all your weapons, you lost all your stats, which happens in sequels, what we saw with Mass Effect. How do we reset Shepard? We kill him. It's like, what?
Kill him off, and then you bring him back to life. Okay, you reset from stage one.
Of all
the paradox of gaming, too. I mean, you want to get stronger as you're playing, but once you reach that pinnacle, everything becomes too easy, and you're kind of disappointed that you don't have that challenge anymore.
Yeah, can you imagine the Dragonborn comes back in whatever version of Skyrim number 2, and he doesn't have any of his chants left, he doesn't have any of his weapons? You're like, what happened?
What's going on? How come? What happened to everything? Like, I remember a long time ago, Final Fantasy X became a big thing. I think I was in grade school.
Oh, really?
And and so they came out with Final Fantasy X-2, which I think was the first direct sequel that came out in the Final Fantasy series. And then it's like, okay, how come? Okay, the main protagonist of X2 was Yuna, and we were saying, what happened? How come she's not that strong anymore? And it seems kind of like everything you did in the last game didn't matter because she doesn't have her powers anymore. She's not strong anymore, even though she lost all of their magic or whatever because the story elements. But she should still have a lot of strength left. She really didn't, though. She was just a normal person.
Funny thing about that is because she was in her own series, she became like the girl power, like X, or was it X2? Yeah, where there was 2 other females, and it was just like girl power, dress up kind of game. But because was it 9 or 10 where they based it off Tactics Advance, where you had the bunny girls species, and then there was the little, I don't know what the names were, but it was such a popular setting. No, I think it was 12. I think 12 was the popular.
With General Bosch. And
it was based off Tactics. It was based off the original Tactics, and then Final Fantasy 12 took that, and then Tactics Advance came on after that. And the series just worked because of that setting, because it was simple. It wasn't like all these different species and all these different characters. And I actually like playing the Tactics Advance games, not because of specifically the story, but because the setting was a continuation. It's like, I know this setting, I know these characters, I know this and that. But in terms of X, I didn't get through too far in X or 10. And I remember playing X2 for about 20 minutes. I'm going, this is weird.
Yeah, I didn't get that far in X2. I guess I don't know what they were doing. I mean, it's appealing to a different audience. It's a vastly different game than Final Fantasy X. 10 was good. I beat 10 after a while. But X2, it was a completely different animal, and it wasn't really appealing to me that much, especially after playing X2. Maybe if X2 was by itself, its own little entity, yeah, okay, I'd say. But it's supposed to be the same character, same setting, and same world as Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy X, and that kind of seemed really strange. So I didn't play that for very long. But the only thing I wanted to bring up on that particular thing was that the same characters, it's Yuna and it's Riku, but they don't seem to have retained all that strength they had at the end of Final Fantasy X, which was a lot because you had to be absurdly, insanely strong to survive the ending. but they didn't seem to have reserved all of that, and seemed kind of strange. Didn't seem logical to me.
I wish I played more to know, because now we're up to like Final Fantasy 15, and
Yeah.
whew, I don't think it's going to stop. But I still think 6 is the best. That's just my personal favorite.
And I think the new Final Fantasy is pretty much Final Fantasy boy band. That's what it seems
Oh,
like.
really? That's what they're calling it
Yeah.
now.
That's why I called it. All the main characters are pretty much guys from a boy band. They're supposed to be a royal prince, but they all dress in black leather. They all have that that boy band look going on. There's like the tall one, the big one, the handsome one. They all have their own. It looks like a boy band. I mean, I forgot which one it is, because it's the one of the latest one. But I mean, the graphics are good. The play style is interesting, but they don't have their own unique styles. They just kind of all have well, we're pretty much the same thing, except they're slightly different looking. So that's why this doesn't seem like a boy band to me.
I do remember the development of 15, how it changed over the years, the titles, the idea behind it, the Shakespearean vibe, and they removed it, and all the things they took apart. So I mean, that's just the Squaresoft previous concept before they got bought out by Enix, that they just kept pushing and pushing. And is this kind of like the BioWare magic, or the crunch period, which never ends? They just keep trying and pushing until they get this nice polished turd. So, yeah, I'm a bit disappointed. They're doing the same thing with Final Fantasy VII Remake. They're just sort of polishing the thing which it should have come out years ago, and now it's coming out in 2 parts, and now it's just the first part, which is half the game or half the intro. It's like, oh, geez, come on. They reinvented the combat system again. It's like, okay. So... yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just the old school mentality, not adapting to the times. I don't know. This is the same thing we have. It's kind of an opposite problem we have in the West, where we don't have enough innovation. We just have the old school way of thinking with, I don't know, D&D style games, which are only related to real time with pause games, or the isometric style cameras. So,
Yeah, I mean, here in the West we call it the standard fantasy setting. It seems we have a very formulaic style, very that we have a legacy problem pretty much everywhere. I mean, the same legacy problem we have in Marvel and DC. The West really has this problem with legacy everywhere. It's one thing worked, then we had things inspired from that one good idea, and this continues down from there. It's kind of a human centipede sort of deal. But in Japan, they have new ideas coming out everywhere. There's one fantasy setting. There's another fantasy setting. I mean, before they started doing the adaptations of the standard Western fantasy setting, like you have in Goblin Slayer, for example. And then you had people saying, you had every time there's a fantasy setting, it was pretty much a unique fantasy setting with its own creatures, its own rules of magic, its pretty much own everything. In the Eastern, I mean, that came out of Japan. But in the West, if it's a fantasy game, it's going to be Tolkien-esque fantasy,
yeah.
a fantasy world with elves and dwarves and stuff. It's the only thing we seem to be able to do. Right? I mean, every once in a while we might get something unique, but 8, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a copy-paste Tolkien-esque world, maybe slightly altered a little bit.
that was one of the problems that I had with the Dragon Age dark fantasy genre setting-ish thing. There was nothing, everything was exactly... like every trope, every pattern you could put into fantasy, they did it. Like everything. Dragons, wyverns, trolls, everything, which is all the same. It's like, can you do something? Like focus on... the only thing they focused on was like the demon blood, or the blood of the enemy that you can drink and become a warden. And that was the premise of the hero.
That actually, I think... no, I'm not saying they ripped it off from anywhere. But it reminded me a lot of this one anime someone showed me called Claymore.
Yes.
That's essentially what they did.
Yeah.
And I was like, are they ripping off Claymore? Because a Claymore, they didn't drink the blood or whatever, but they had like I think maybe they did drink the blood. I don't remember very much, but they either drank the blood, or they had something from the bad guys, from the monsters they slay. They put something like that inside of them. They had like maybe a piece of the monster, or they drank the monster's blood, and then that gave them powers. And then they became, the hunters. And it's pretty much copy and paste idea from the witches from that setting over to Dragon Age. It's the exact same thing, except they're called different names.
Yeah, we'll
And
have to
Dragon Age could be meant.
We'll have to check the dates because Dragon Age was in development for God knows like 9-10 years.
Yeah.
So
I'm not saying they ripped them off or anything, but it's very similar.
Right.
It's very similar.
Okay, let's keep going.
So Dave Ackerman and I sat down. Dave is my best friend. And he and I sat down and said, we got to get all these people out of the way, the Johnnies and everybody else, so that there's new blood. And we have to knock the tech level down. And we eventually settle on, we're going to blow everybody up, but we didn't want to throw the society all the way back to guys wearing hockey masks and leftover sports equipment driving around in wrecked cars.
That's Karoshi. Best I've got. And should be about right under the circumstances.
We all agreed it was roughly between 2035 and 2045 as a rough period. During that time, people rebuild Night City. They move to abandoned cities across the United States and parts of Europe. They rebuild transit and society, but in novel and weird ways. And there's a big shakeup in terms of how the net works, how corporations work, and the role of the United States government in that world. One of the things that's evolved out of Red is it's a society that is coming out of essentially a technological, not apocalypse, but slowdown. Technological societies hinge on very, very specialized things always working. For example, you don't get cell phones until you can get rare elements, get them moved over to a factory, get them processed, get them made into chips, get those chips moved to another place on the planet, and then finally make a cell phone. But once you have made that cell phone, you can have millions and millions. There were like 2 billion cell phones put together last year. So what we have is in the Fourth Corporate War, a lot of denial of transport and resources that knocked everybody back on their heels. No new.
This is why it's really cool, because it feels like the slums, and you're talking about a classic cyberpunk setting, and you saw from the visuals, when you talk of cyberpunk, you talk of a heavy Asian influence, high tech, but in this low tech setting, and he just gave you the reason because there was a slowdown. There were certain resources available that aren't available anymore, and now you have all these people trying to scrounge for it or use what's available. And that's to set up the world of 2077, where now we're speeding up again. We're going into more production. We're now finding corporations are now dominating Night City, or at least the general world that people are living in, and trying to survive and trying to live and scrounge and trade and what have you. And that's where you get all the diversity. Just that whole little times jump of, what is it, 60 years, 50, 60 years? So simple setup, simple way of doing it. And if you want to learn more, you can play the game, you can get the paperback, you can play some, I don't know if you want to actually play the tabletop, you don't have to, but there's lots of stories within the book of Cyberpunk 2020 as well as Cyberpunk Red to read about. So when this guy makes a new book, it's not just a game with this rule set. He creates all the factions, all the characters, and he explains what happens to the previous setting. And like that's more than just your average novel writer. That's why we look at people like Pondsmith like he's this crazy wizard that just does like 5 different things at once. And you know, I have to wrap my brain. I still haven't done so because I tried playing D&D or pen and paper. I wasn't very good at it. I didn't really get into it that much, and I can't wrap my brain around creators like that because there's so much talent and passion and patience you have to go through to, let alone create these worlds, but actually participate and play in them.
Mm-hmm. And that's the setup scenario that he has here, the one he was just going over. That is a very, very tabletop RPG sort of mentality. You know, the resources he's talking about. You know, you have to get these resources, and you have to take them over here to get, you know, them processed. And then you have to take them over here, and then you can start making cell phones, and you get highly rewarded because you can make thousands of cell phones once you put the work in. That's not something you get from someone who's just you know, your average person who doesn't have this sort of mentality, who hasn't had to think on these lines. You usually get something more grand, more something larger, like, okay, so the world's supply of of gold is being kept somewhere. You get these, giant Bond, like James Bond-esque sort of scenarios. The world is on the brink of nuclear destruction, or there's going to be a giant alien invasion coming in, or the corporations want to poison all the water, but you don't. But it takes someone who has dealt with this sort of scenario, who has gone through, has slogged through the specifics of daily life and society to come up with these sorts of scenarios. Like, so he's going. One of the biggest problems here he's stating is that the world of Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be like resources. Resources was the factor that, there's a slowdown, now there's a speed up. You wouldn't really get this with someone who wasn't ever part of the old guard, because I've heard these people think, I've heard interviews, I've listened to interviews, I've seen how the way these people of the old guard think, and it's very different to what a modern creator, the way the modern creator thinks. These people, the old guard, they think on terms of these small details. Like they can make a whole scenario on there being, like a recall on beef patties or something. It's very interesting because they can take something so minute that you don't ever think about and turn it into something huge.
And just think about what CD Projekt Red can do, because I think we can all agree that this game is going to be successful. They can do a sequel, they can do a prequel, and if they were to do a prequel, it's all laid out for them. They don't have to think about it. It's all there because Michael just figured it out. And you just have to adapt that to a game, which is what they're doing right now with 2020. So it's just such a great connectivity between, like when you think of tabletop games, you think of just a pure game. There's no technology, there's no computers. You have dice rolls, you have your imagination, and you have a bunch of people dedicated to having fun. And it's just an adult version of kids playing outside. And it's just so well structured. And to put that into a game with all the ray tracing technology, I don't know if they're going to keep doing that with the new NVIDIA cards and all the other crazy open world ideas they have, which I have to buy a new box just to appreciate it if I really wanted to. But just to do that is like, wow, you know what? They're doing it right. They're taking the concepts that people have loved from the 70s and 80s, the same thing they did with Baldur's Gate, and they're just bringing it into the new era, and it's gonna define 2020. It's gonna define that decade, I think, and all the games that try to come out after it, because it's like how else can you not have a benchmark, especially after The Witcher 3? So it's just we've never had anything that's come near The Witcher 3, and for good reason, because it takes so much effort and time.
And the Witcher team, they are known for putting this gargantuan amount of effort into everything they do.
And they don't just do the Witcher series, but the supplemental games, the smaller games, the card games. It's only quality. They don't do, even if it's a small title, they'll be like, yeah, well, we'll just do this because we like it. And it's going to be fun. They're not going to start doing, at least I hope they're not going to start doing Facebook games or mobile games or, make a quick buck sort of games. They're not interested in that. Yeah.
Was that the Blizzard Diablo game for the mobile? and they're trying to call everyone crying man babies because they call a stupid idea a stupid idea.
If they would just release half their ideas, which we know we've been working on for years, like StarCraft Ghost and God knows what else, be like, you know what, Blizzard, at least you produced the thing you said you were going to do and didn't waste everyone's time. Like, can you imagine working on something for 5 years, have nothing to show for it?
And it gets scrapped or forgotten about. I was looking forward to StarCraft Ghost. It looked really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the idea was very similar to, what was that Command and Conquer game, Renegade or Commando, where you play a single unit in third person mode, and storyline, all the normal stuff you'd want from the lore of Command and Conquer. And now you have Blizzard, a hugely popular game company, taking their science fiction franchise and focusing on a story which they did in the single player campaign with StarCraft, and just adding to it. It's like, we want more. Like they realize that we want more, right? Like it's not just arena battles and and whatever is like PUBG style games. Like, no, we want actual characters with stories that have reasons to be and do. So hopefully we'll get all that in the RPG extravaganza that is Cyberpunk 2077, but we can't be too sure with the other companies out there, unfortunately.
Stuff got built. A lot of things didn't get delivered. A lot of ships with tons and tons and tons and tons of stuff and cargo set in harbors because they were afraid to leave because the harbors were mined. And a lot of the infrastructure got messed up. But if you need to get a cell phone, you didn't care about it being a new model of cell phone. There were 3 billion cell phones out there somewhere.
So that's a really interesting idea. If you have this technology that's lying around, like in Cyberpunk 2077, you don't know what's great, you don't know what's the top of the line, you just need it because you need to see through walls, or you need to lockpick, or you need to do this or that. So it's kind of like this, everyone's running around, modified, transhumanist, whatever, and they're just scrounging to get by. Is this good? Is this bad? Is this sell well? Who knows? And that's kind of the interesting sort of rummaging kind of scavenger world you're in, even though it's all this high tech.
Yeah, and again, what we just got finished listening to, this is the same idea I was talking about, the same mentality of the old guard. I mean, he's talking about infrastructure. He's talking about shipments being non-deliverable. He's talking about the resources being in demand but not available. He's talking about the difference between new cell phones and old cell phones. You don't really see this anywhere else besides the mind of these. It's just things you never ever really typically think about when you're thinking about a cyberpunk game. I mean, even if you look at the series Ghost in the Shell, they don't, unless it's a case involving something like this. You don't really pay attention to infrastructure or the minute details of everyday life, and especially not in a game like this, like a Cyberpunk. It's usually something more grand, something more spectacular, something more dramatic. But you never really run into problems or scenarios or listen to the background that becomes so prominent, that is related to things, mundane things like infrastructure. And that's what these people who have spent years or decades, creating scenarios and campaigns for their friends, this is the type of mentality these people have developed. Because it's, if you're playing tabletop RPG, like I've read Gary Gygax, he wrote on this and everything, that you have to think of new scenarios oftentimes on the fly. When he was running his game, you can't think of everything, you can't plan for everything. Somebody might say, I want to do something crazy, and that would destroy your entire game. So you have to think of something on the fly. And so you can't always think of, like, dragon comes out of nowhere, or there's a bomb nearby. Sometimes you have to, your ideas have to relegate to something more mundane, like, okay, it's spring and it's springtime, and in spring this river doesn't flow that fast, so you can't really catch the people who are running away from you. You relegate it to thinking outside the box from your typical writer. And so we see this right here with what he just said. This city, this environment, was heavily influenced by the state of the infrastructure, the ability of whether or not some supply lines can be delivered, and the scarcity of resources. And it's not really usually a huge deal or a common everyday occurrence, a typical occurrence in a setting like Cyberpunk.
This is what makes the genre, at least from my perspective, the books that I've read from either William Gibson or, any of the cyberpunk genre I can think of, PKD or Philip K. Dick. It's hard to find a cyberpunk writer, and it's hard to find a good one, or one that you can appreciate. So,
and Philip K. Dick. Don't get me started on Philip K. Dick.
Yeah, he's wow.
Excellent.
Just
excellent. I highly recommend anyone in the chat. I highly recommend Philip K. Dick.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Thing is, Chip's gotta make it into the Thieves' Terminal. That's all I need. Think you can do that? Then we got a deal.
Basically, instead of wrecking a society as a tremendous explosion, everything ended, we had to figure out ways to basically have it fall apart in slow motion so that people would still have cool technology. They just wouldn't have it ubiquitously. For example, in Cyberpunk Red, we have this idea called the night markets. And some of you are probably familiar with the idea of food trucks and food truck markets. A bunch of food trucks all come together. Everybody puts up the signs, a little bit like that. And I said, what if that's how things get done in the Red times? That you don't go to get a new gun by going to the Militech store, because there isn't a Militech store, because they're not getting shipments delivered anymore because the ship was sunk. Instead, some guy has now found a bunch of containers that have guns and Militech stuff or food or whatever, and they all meet and they have a night market. People buy things, fixers make deals, and then they disappear and pops up somewhere else the next night. Everything's a lot more fluid. How do you hold that together? Well, everybody's got phones. They're not the best phones, but they've got them. And maybe the phones can't reach into orbit anymore because the satellites were shot down, but you can still call anybody in town when you need to.
What a crazy cool idea of having all the shops be mobile and you're just randomly finding stuff and it's always different. I mean, we're not going to get that specifically in 2077, but what a concept of just like, yep, we got a shop on wheels. And
food truck style arms dealers and stuff.
Yeah, like you have no more rounds for your gun, or you need more razors for your clip. It's just like this. You don't have any equipment available. It's all random, and no one knows what's hot or new. Every price is negotiable. You're like, what's going on? What is that?
There's no set market value. It's just okay. Here's the guy. Here's the food truck I'm going to. The gun truck I'm going to. And it's just basically the price is to negotiate on how bad you need this right now.
Yeah, it's a lot of bartering, I'm sure. Like, you do this for me, I'll give you this. So you kind of got that when I was reading Neuromancer, where you get into these shops. You can't get a gun, but they have like this Viper style weapon. It's like, what is that? It's like poison. It's kind of looks like a Viper. It's like, oh, it's still a weapon. It's lethal, but it won't be detectable by the police because they're looking for guns or whatever. So, like, you'll have all these impromptu weapons or equipment or things that are alien for the sake of them just being unknown, even though they were developed 5 years ago, or they came from Europe, or they came from space, or whatever. So, just crazy stuff. Now, obviously, that's a lot different than 2077, but that's where he's coming from. That's kind of he's figured this all out, how it was before. And now that these corporations have taken over, they figured out that supply line, saying, oh, people want to buy this, we'll just keep producing that.
Nice. Ooh, I'll take that. That's a 16.
He's like,
People should check it out, particularly if they haven't played a Cyberpunk game before, because I think it's going to be not just interesting, but the easiest and most accessible way to get into this type of genre. Red, for one thing, takes advantage of a lot of things I learned working in video games over the last 20 years in terms of ease of play, simplifying things. We have given players, in terms of just rules, a lot more simplified options, and we have a graded situation where people can play as simple as they want or as complex as they want.
V, my man. You made it. You blowing up all over the news. Are you alone?
I just want the money.
Much of this we were designing long before I even met the CDPR guys, because we knew it sooner or later, like, well, we might want to have Johnny come back, so we can't exactly say, his guts were spilled everywhere. So we did a Marvel death. No one ever saw it for sure. It's been really fun because I get to see the interpretation, to be honest, of a group of Cyberpunk fans. The guys on the 2077 team, many of them were fans, grew up with those characters, and seeing those interpretations is like seeing a bunch of fans who are doing really, really cool, fanfic, really, but it's got the best toys and tools in the world to do it.
See, if that's explained well, if that's actually explained why Johnny Silverhand is still alive all this time, and I'm sure they can give some technological reason why that is, then it's great. I don't like the idea of having continuity or past people be still alive. unless there's a really good reason, or like they're a version, they're a memory dump, they're this or that. It can work in stuff like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines scenarios because you're dealing with immortals anyway. Marvel Comics is notorious. All comics are notorious for doing that because they don't want to change what works. They want to stay afloat. I get that.
Legacy intact.
Yeah, they want to keep their Wolverine alive. They want to, hey, maybe Wolverine has lived for several centuries, not just two. It's like, well, okay, well, how old is he really? He doesn't remember. I don't know why. It's that idea that we have to perpetuate the current or the past generation with the current one just because. Like, how old is Batman? He's perpetually 42 or whatever the age is, right? He's just on that cusp of getting older but not too old. I know it's always that way. How old is Superman? Well, he doesn't really age. Sometimes he does. Some comics he's really old. So
I'm pretty sure. I mean, I've seen comics where Superman is pretty much ageless and immortal. And I've seen ones where he's able to age, but it's a slow aging process. So I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what's canon and what's not canon.
Yeah, I'd rather have, if you're going to talk about tech and you're going to talk about, or at least science fiction with cyberpunk, you want it to be as realistic and gritty and mortality or as believable as possible. So you don't want to go the Johnny Silverhand just got reborn route, or we found the secret alloy that can be boiled down and we could resuscitate his bones or something. It's like, why do you just let him die. Just kill him off.
Well, kill your darlings.
Yes. Kill your darlings. That's correct.
One reason why Red ended up, we're doing what's called the Jumpstart pack, which is more of a beginner's simple pack first. But part of that is we also wanted to buy all the time because we were working with CD, and there's stuff buried all through the timelines and the history that will have a bearing on what happens in 77. So it's a good place to mine for weird little clues. And remember, that's one of the things that we really enjoy doing is burying hints all over the place. So that if you're really paying attention, bam, one day it hits you. Oh man, they did that. Son of a gun.
See, that's the real value you get out of having deep lore or having stories before stories, is that there's going to be background information on a quest or an item or a piece of technology or a people or whatever that you're like, where did that come from? It's like, oh, well, there is supplementary material, and if they give the basics of 20 years ago this happened, great, that's all you really need. But if you want to learn more, there's supplementary material, there's other games, there's board games, there's books to pick up. And that's what I like about Michael, because he's just saying, yeah, we did all the groundwork, we did all this stuff. And you have until next year to start reading and to get into it if you're a fan. And
I want to.
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to read anything. You could just appreciate it for what it is. But it's there. It's as opposed to someone makes Dragon Age 2 and it's like, oh, we gotta figure out what happened.
All the books and comics and stuff.
Let's start writing some new books. So they're doing it in the opposite direction or the opposite order, and you can really tell why that, or what happens when you pick up those books. You're like, wait a second, now Flemeth is this hot mom, older woman. I thought she was a decrepit old witch. When did this happen?
Like a decrepit old witch to me.
Yeah. That's what happened there. Now she's Kate Mulgrew on crack. Like, what happened there?
Yeah, she was voiced by Kate Mulgrew, wasn't she? Like,
yeah. Kate Mulgrew, she's a bit melodramatic in general. So I tend to give her a lot of leeway because she is the first female captain. So
I didn't really like her as a
character.
I mean, I liked her as the acting style, whatever. It's fine, but I didn't really like Janeway as a captain that much.
Well, I don't know if you saw the previous female captain for Voyager, who was this French. They actually got a French actress to be French. I was like, wow, they're actually,
that's weird.
Compared to John Patrick Stewart, they got a British man to play a French man. He just
the most British man that's ever lived.
Good evening, sir. I was like, can you please be French?
This guy's
nope.
obviously French. So guy's obviously French. Listen to that accent.
So they got this French lady. I can't remember the pilot name of Voyager to try out, and obviously she wasn't as good as Mulgrew, But it's like, wow, that's what a French lady sounds like. And yes, she could have been better. She could have been more emotive and more domineering as a captain should be. But it was so like they wanted to improve on the mistakes, or at least what they thought would have been errors with the next generation, and say, okay, let's get an actual French actress and make a French captain. And you're like, oh, good, thank you. And the performance, and the performance wasn't great in comparison, but it wasn't bad. And all they had to do was maybe give her like 2 minutes of coaching, and that actress would have done it. And voila, we would have had some goddamn ethnicity aside from Chakotay being a Native American with a freaking tattoo, which is about as Native American as he got. And I think that's the problem I had with futuristic worlds. They're just sort of amalgamated. And there's no, maybe that's what's going to happen in the future. I don't know, but there's no sense of cultural identity, or like I'm Belgian, I am this, I am that, I'm American. There's a big American vibe, I think, in general with Star Trek, but never the European, never the Japanese, never the African. It's always been alien. It's always been other cultures from alien worlds. And when you're talking cyberpunk, there's a distinct Asian influence and a partial American, partial frontiersman sort of attitude. And that's normal. That's fine. So long as that's there, and all these other things he's talking about, which are like little diamonds in the rough you have to find and dig for, I think that's the feeling you want to get from the cyberpunk worlds, at least from his. Other cyberpunk worlds or other futuristic worlds are just too far advanced. They're too computerized. They're too robotic. Everyone's a machine. Everyone's so connected. Whereas
it seems like the futuristic worlds tend to come in like two flavors. Either Mad Max or the exact opposite, which is everything is digital, everything is like it's all one planet is one big machine.
The two big genres have been post-apocalyptic, where everything's destroyed, or it's been cybernetically up the wazoo and everything's just technology. And there's really no, that I've seen, even in anime, there's really no in between.
And this game feels like kind of like the blue collar, the guy in between. You have some high technology, but you also have your mundane elements. Your more mundane, more present day sort of elements. And he explained that because there was a big slowdown. So you have like a strange cocktail of present day technology combined with futuristic technology.
I'm curious how they connect Red to 2077. So I'm sure they're going to have lots of nods, lots of Easter eggs for people who know it, but until we read it, we won't know.
Come on, Aina, make the dock wait. Pull some pants on your culo and get down here. Subway entrance. Bring your iron.
Another thing is that it is a lot more accessible because you don't have to jump in and know all the characters. You're being part of the process that's making the new group of characters. So you could go into Red and never know who Johnny or Alden and those people were. It wouldn't matter. They would be like legends you might have heard about at some point, in the same way as nobody out here really probably remembers an Elvis concert. We know Elvis did concerts, we've seen the films. How many people in our audience have actually gone to an Elvis concert? I haven't. So I think we've created a really interesting design that integrates cyberpunk in a modern way. And you don't have to have watched Blade Runner 800 times, even though I have, and I recommend you do. So basically, I think that what you'll find...
I really like the little details. I don't know if you could see the lucky cats.
Oh, yeah.
They're all plugged in.
The little niggle cats.
Yeah, like if you go to Chinatown, I think every shop, when I go downtown Toronto, I go to China. There's several boroughs in Toronto, not just downtown, but elsewhere. There's at least 8 or 9 Chinatowns, and they all have these lucky cats. It's just this thing, which is very cyberpunk.
In a modern way. And you don't have to have watched Blade Runner 800 times, even though I have, and I recommend you do. So basically, I think that what you'll find is if you really are curious about what makes up the background of the video game you're seeing, or you want to see how the genre works in a game that you can play, you should check Red out.
Yeah, the only thing I'm hesitant of is the time dilation. I noticed that even in the Outer Worlds, it's becoming a common element where it's no longer real time. It's like slowed down real time, which is fine. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it just feels like some of the skill is lost because you can focus so much. Like when I would play Quake 3 back in the day, we would have macros for decreasing your mouse sensitivity. So when you're aiming, you can really get really accurate because you decrease the mouse sensitivity and you can move left and right really quickly and use your railgun or whatever you were aiming with. And we didn't have slow down time, you know? So now that you have this skill in these new games coming out where you just slow down time, you just collect all your targets and boom, 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 boom. I wouldn't say it cheapens the feel, it just makes it easier. So
it takes a little bit of the skill out of it.
I think so, yeah. But if it gets more people into the game and they want to max out that skill, then good on them. You know, it's a single-player game. No one's going to judge them.
And they kind of did that with the Hitman franchise. They came out with Hitman Absolution, with all the fans hated because it was not a Hitman game, really. It was more of a cinematic disaster. But one thing's they added a few things to Agent 47. Before that game, you know, it was just, you had no real special abilities. You just had, you know, your brain, and you're trying to figure out how to kill your target without getting caught. When Absolution came about, you had like something like Instinct, which is kind of like the eagle vision from Assassin's Creed. You can pick out, helps you highlight guards and targets and stuff. And then they also added in, I think, mark your targets. So basically, you can stop time and get your pistols and mark a bunch of soldiers. And then once you're done, you press OK, go, and you'll go in like a little cinematic mode where he just kills all the guys that you marked. It's not Hitman at all. You're not supposed to kill anyone. I mean, ideally, you're not supposed to kill anyone. So it was highly boggling to me why they would add in this whole mechanic that if you're a good Hitman player, you'd never utilize. But in the game that followed, which was Hitman 2016, I believe, and then the Hitman 2, they kept the Instinct, but they didn't. What they didn't do was make it, you know, do all the extra stuff that came with it. So basically, all Instinct does now is allows you to highlight guards and little objects in the environment and the target. And they actually removed your ability to attack, you know, to mark your target, as far as I know. So basically, if you have to use a gun, it's all up to you whipping out that gun and aiming precisely and then taking fire.
I'm suddenly reminded.
They had that in and they walked it back.
I'm suddenly reminded of that magic briefcase in Hitman. I don't know if it was Absolution. Oh, yeah. It was just this homing weapon. It's just like.
And this is actually Hitman 2, the new Hitman 2. And they came out. One of the things that they did was come out with the briefcase, because it was a good thing in Blood Money to have a briefcase because you kept your sniper in there. But one thing they had for Hitman, the new Hitman series, that you can knock out people. It's the first time in the entire franchise where you can actually use items to knock people out from a distance. And they decided to do that with the briefcase because, I mean, why not? I mean, in this game, you can knock people out with a muffin. But they forgot to fix the trajectory on this thing. So when you threw your briefcase, it just homes on your target. If they turn a corner, your briefcase will turn the corner and still knock them out. It became kind of a meme. It was funny. It was hilarious.
What are your guns for? Just freaking throw stuff at me. This body pile of
bodies.
Come over here. Oh, that's sad. Oh.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I mean, this is it didn't come out into the new Hitman game, but now you can use things to knock people out. You can like throw a wrench at their head, knock them out. But the briefcase came out, and this is one guy where he threw his briefcase, and it twirled slowly in the air, like it really slowly. And the guy turned the corner, and the briefcase just turned the corner with him. And kept flying until he knocked him out.
Oh boy! Well, Gotta love all these wonderful assassination games. They break the rules of physics. Okay, guys. Well, thanks for chilling out with us on a rather humid day. I don't know if your Tuesdays are filled with siestas and nice tea, but do take it easy. It's getting kind of humid out there, even during the evenings. And any kind of new information regarding Cyberpunk or any videos you want LiteratureDevil and I to cover, just post them on Twitter, post them in the comments, put them on the community tab. You can send them a direct message. You could email me, whatever you feel comfortable with. Say hello. And if he's available and it catches his fancy, I'll try to get him online and we'll do a chat. Hopefully on the weekends. I think that's when we have most of our free time available to us, I believe. So, yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
Weekends are pretty good.
Yeah, weekends are the best for me, just in general. So, yeah, thanks, guys, for chilling out with us and having a great time with Michael Pondsmith and all his wonderful ideas and slowly killing people with briefcases. And have yourself a great day, and we'll catch you in the next video.
Good day, everybody.